We'll go ahead and call the Local Government and Small Business Committee meeting to order, and starting a little behind schedule, probably because of our dead clock. First, our action items. We have I'll go ahead, actually, excuse me, before action items, we'll go ahead and go around the table. Paul, do you want to go around the table and start us off? Introductions?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Avila Associates.
Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTEC International.
Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
Good morning, Eddie Marquez. I'm here in two capacities. One of them is I represent the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Orange County. And second, I just started with the Union Roofing Contractors Association, so representing them as well.
Very good.
I'm Derek Alatorre with South Coast AQMD.
Ben Benoit, board member. Want to introduce yourself real quick?
Fabian Weston, South Coast.
All right.
Elaine Hills, AQMD staff.
And where's Aisha?
Very good.
And Nancy Feldman, Council's Office.
Where were you hiding?
I was
All right.
speaking with Mark.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll go into the two action items. I'm sorry, the first action item was just call to order. Second item is the meeting minutes. Anyone have any questions on the minutes? I'll look for a motion on the minutes. I have a motion, 2 seconds. Any opposed? All right, so ordered. All right, review of follow-up items. Derek?
Sure, there was no action items from our meeting in July, but I'm going to turn to Elaine and the other business. Can I do that right now, or do I have to wait till the end? I can do it now, right? Yeah, okay, why don't I do that? So just want to make sure all of you are aware that we have our Clean Air Awards coming up on September 12th. And if you want to attend, you'll get one complimentary ticket, October 12th. No, it's not the 12th. I'm looking at this, and I'm not reading my notes correctly. It was emailed out to you yesterday on the 12th, and it's for October the 5th. 5th? 5th, yes. So my apologies. That's what I get for not reading this before and knowing what I'm supposed to say.
This for the end of the meeting.
I probably should have, but I wasn't sure. That's why I looked to Elaine, and that was my fault. I apologize.
All right, with that, we'll go into the first item, the renewable fuels.
Follow-up comment on follow-up items.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes, just wanted to follow up on my follow-up request for Rule 219 update. If you recall, in 2017, district staff made a commitment to the board in response to a request by the Printing Industry Association to do further outreach to specifically the printing industry on how 219 was going to play out. And so I've asked repeatedly for a status report on those activities, and I was told that staff would be bringing it back this year sometime.
So, Rita, that one is on my, every time we have a staff comes to me and asks me for agenda items, I have to, look at them, and that's always, 219 is always on there, and I check with staff to see if they're ready for it, and they're not ready for it, but it's, every time we have a meeting, I'm asking staff if it's available.
If I can comment, since Printing Industries Association is a member of the Alliance, one, I don't recall that we asked for that, but if we did, I guess we did. But I know that 219 is also, what do I want to say, in a state of flux with reclaim being still in play. So if it's premature at this time, it's fine with us. If you need some more time,
make sure it's fine with Rita.
Well, let me clarify, because I think we're talking about two different things. So the request was originally made by Jerry Bonetto at the board meeting, the adoption hearing of Rule 219. And it was basically targeted towards the, outreach and more information on filling out the new forms that ensued from that adoption. So staff said they were going to be doing outreach to the printing industry, and my request was just for an update on what outreach has been done as a result of that request.
I'll keep on asking every month.
Is this new business here? We're going to do that at the end. This is just general statements. Okay, so we'll do new business at the end? Okay, thank you.
All right. With that, we'll go into our first item, the renewable fuels. Philip? Hit the bottom of the stand there. It'll go green. There you go. Now you're on.
Hello?
There you go.
Great. Oh, can I go back? Thank you. Oh, am I in control now? Okay. Good morning and thank you. My name is Phil Barocca. I'm a program supervisor in the Technology Advancement Office and the Technology Demonstration Division. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you on renewable fuels in the transportation sector. I will hopefully provide you with some new information. However, there may be some information that you are all aware of, so my apologies in advance. So let me start with a brief background on the state of the air quality in this region. As many of you may know, the AQMD recently completed and approved its air quality management plan, which is the blueprint for how the South Coast intends to bring this region into attainment with national ambient air quality standards. One of those standards is for ozone, which needs to meet an 8-hour concentration of 80 parts per billion in 2023 and 75 parts per billion in 2031. Ozone, as we know, is formed from the reaction of airborne oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, and volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight. So the strategy is to reduce ozone to reduce, the strategy to reduce ozone is to reduce NOx. So if you reduce NOx, you will reduce ozone. And where does NOx come from? Comes from primarily the combustion of fuels. The AQMP has identified the transportation sector and mobile sources as the greatest collective contributor to NOx in this region. On the chart, the white line is showing where NOx levels are expected to be based on current regulations, and the line below it, the black line, shows where NOx levels need to be reduced each year to meet these two ozone standard deadlines. So as you can see, the current regulations are not going to bring us to where we need to be. And as indicated in the slide, we need a 45% reduction by 2023 beyond current regulations, and 55% to meet the 2031 deadline. The Air Quality Management Plan has identified control measures on how NOx emissions can be reduced from the transportation sector. However, it involves converting nearly all heavy-duty vehicles to zero and near-zero emission systems. This will require regulatory efforts that go beyond the South Coast's current authority and/or significant funding to incentivize fleet turnover. And with respect to funding incentives, that will be discussed by our next presenter. So, do we have the technology to achieve zero and near-zero emission transportation? The answer is yes. As an example, the 3 engines depicted here have all been certified to CARB's optional low NOx emission standard, which allows manufacturers to have their equipment certified to a standard that is as much as 90% cleaner than the current national and state standard, earning them the distinction as near zero emission. These engines are the next generation of natural gas-powered engines and are already available in all of the major truck manufacturers' chassis, and buses, and refuse trucks, concrete mixer trucks, street sweepers, and other heavy-duty applications. Many of the vehicles that you see operating today that have the CNG sticker on the back are operating on natural gas, and the newer ones are most likely using this new near-zero emission technology. It's been determined that extensive application of this existing technology will have a significant impact in reducing ozone in this region, and we would like to see the diesel engine manufacturers meet or exceed the levels that their natural gas cousins have achieved, but so far this has not happened. So, in short, the technology is here today. It's in use. The refueling infrastructure is here and continues to expand. It is significantly more cost-effective today than the alternative zero technologies that are in development and costs are expected to become lower and more competitive with increased sales. So how does this tie into renewable fuels? Getting off the natural gas spiel. So here's an overview of what I would like to present to you on renewable fuels today. What is a renewable fuel? What renewable fuels are used in transportation today? The significant roles that renewable fuels serve in our society, some of the significant drivers for renewable fuel production and use, a brief definition of what is renewable natural gas, what is renewable diesel and biodiesel, and then I hopefully will have some information for you on the projects the South Coast AQMD is co-sponsoring that pertains to renewable fuels. So renewable fuels are fuels derived, produced, converted from renewable, sustainable sources of energy. In short, they are not fossil fuels. So in the transportation sector, the fuels that are needed include electricity and fuels that can be used in clean, near-zero engines and fuel cells. So renewable forms of electricity, hydro, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and renewable forms of energy that produce gaseous and liquid fuels include various forms of biomass that are derived from agricultural operations, food and green waste, dairy and livestock operations, and biosolids and wastewater. That sequence of figures at the bottom is basically providing you a concept of how biomass is converted into both renewable natural gas and renewable hydrogen. So what are the roles that renewable fuels play in our society? Reducing dependency on petroleum-based fuels, increasing energy security from domestically produced fuels, potential to reduce criteria pollutants of NOx and PM, reduce greenhouse gases, and addressing short-lived climate pollutants, particularly again from the dairy industry. What are the drivers for transportation renewable fuels? At the federal level, there is the Renewable Fuel Standard and the Energy Independence Act, Independence and Security Act of 2007, signed by the Bush administration. This program aims to achieve increased domestic production of non-fossil-based transportation fuels and attain certain greenhouse gas reduction objectives. The goal is to incorporate 36 billion, that's a B, of renewable transportation fuel into the nation's supply by 2022. The program includes a credit incentive program which provides producers with credits for their production and a market for selling those credits to obligated parties such as refiners and importers of gasoline and diesel. On the state level in California, there is a question?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Phil,
Yes.
whatever happened to ethanol? Is that just a Midwestern thing?
What happened to ethanol?
Yeah.
Well, it is primarily a Midwestern thing. Ethanol, in our studies, has not produced the level of NOx reductions that we need here in the South Coast Air Basin, and so that is why it is not a fuel that we're looking at right now to try to help that objective.
A quick question. Let's say the big trucks come in from the Midwest. Is that still being sold, ethanol? Do you know?
Oh, yes. Yeah, ethanol is actually a big part of the federal Renewable Fuel Standard program. Okay. So if you look into anything having to do with the RFS program, you will see that ethanol is a major part of that objective to produce and displace fossil fuels and produce more renewable fuels, yeah. Okay. So again, going to the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program. Now this program is more focused on reducing the carbon intensity of the transportation fuels in California, and the objective is to reduce that carbon intensity overall by 10% by 2020. This program also incorporates a credit incentive program where low carbon intensity fuel producers and distributors can earn low carbon fuel credits that are then marketable to entities needing to offset their carbon footprints. This program is currently under review for amendments, possibly to push out the 2020 date a little further, but also to add a more ambitious 20% reduction goal in 2030 instead of the current 18%. And there's also in California the short-lived climate pollutant program. Again, that is primarily focused on methane emissions from dairy operations and looking to achieve a 50% reduction by 2030, if I can read the slide correctly. Also, initiatives that have been put in place with regards to waste diversion. AB 341, authored by Assembly Member Chesbro, has required a 75% commercial organic waste diversion by 2020. That is helping to drive food and green waste away from landfills and into composting, but also into other projects such as I'll bring up with regards to anaerobic digestion to produce renewable fuels. Okay, I decided to put this slide up here. This is related to renewable fuels, carbon intensity, again, having to do with the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program. Just to give you an idea of the carbon intensity ratings of various transportation fuels. So on the far left, you're going to get what is conventional fossil-based diesel fuels coming in at close to 100 grams of CO2 equivalents per millijoules. That's the units that are used here. And on the far right, you're not seeing something that's incorrect. That is a negative 250 or so gram carbon reduction associated with renewable natural gas that's produced from dairy operations. So, in effect, the production of this fuel and the use of this fuel is actually reducing greenhouse gases as a result.
Phil?
Yes, so I'll get into that. Renewable natural gas is, for all intents and purposes, methane, yes. Yes, it is.
Question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Phil, when you talk about the negative, how does that happen?
How is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay, so not all greenhouse gases are created equal. Carbon dioxide is basically the standard, and it's, if you give it a weighting, it's about a factor of 1. Methane has a factor of over 20. I'm not exactly sure the number, it's probably 24. And so what's happening is when you're making this fuel from dairy operations, from high methane sources that are considered to basically go into the atmosphere, you're actually having a 20-to-1 type of a ratio applied, because you're taking the methane that would normally go into the atmosphere away. It produces a fuel that will be used in an internal combustion engine that will be producing, as a result, CO2. So you're taking a 24-to-1 ratio of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Yeah. Okay, so going to the question of what is renewable natural gas or biomethane, for all intents and purposes, renewable natural gas is methane. The term biomethane related to the fact that it is derived from renewable sources. Feedstocks, basically I went over that. It comes from a variety of different, biomass sources, and the production methods by which biomethane are made, typically anaerobic digestion or thermochemical process such as gasification, and I will show a couple of examples of projects that the South Coast is co-sponsoring in those two areas.
So I have a question, I'm sorry.
Sure.
No, it's me. It's user error. When you're talking about carbon sequestration, as it applies to the methane, can the same be said for some of the other renewables? Like, so for example, if you take diesel, renewable diesel, aren't you in fact also sequestering the carbon there, and can't they get more credit for that as well, or is that a different process?
No, exactly. You're correct. The feedstocks for renewable diesel are the same type of biomass feedstocks that would also result in methane reduction. So yes, there would be that, in effect, a carbon sequestering effect as well through the production and use of that as a renewable fuel, yes. we'll get into, okay, we'll just continue
Yeah,
on.
I guess I have a,
Yeah, and that's great that renewable diesel can have that end objective. And as I alluded to with regards to, at the beginning, with regards to the engine technology, where we would hope that the diesel engine manufacturers can produce an engine that can get the low NOx that the natural gas currently gets. So we're kind of struggling with what the technology is available there today to meet our immediate needs of ozone reduction here. How can we get that done today? And so that's kind of what was really going on with the beginning slides, is showing that there is a solution that's already out there today commercially available.
Bill had a quick question here.
yeah, I've got a question. I was looking at some information that I received last month. And here in California, we had about 1 million acres burned, and they're estimating that it released about 10 to 15 million metric tons of carbon, roughly the equivalent of emissions resulting from 1 million Californians every year. Wouldn't it make more sense for the state and the air agencies to combine their intellects and go after better forest management, or how to reduce the incidence of forest fires, than it would to try to redesign diesel engines, or look for either mobile or stationary, how to reduce at a terrible expense emissions from those sources. I mean, you'd get more bang for your buck.
Right. So that is something that I will hopefully provide some information to as well. You're talking about another form of biomass, the agricultural and trees. I actually put trees in there. I mean, we recognize that there's a significant number of trees that have died from the bark beetle situation. And so working with folks at UC Riverside and others, there's the trees in California, hopefully the dead trees, represent probably one of the largest sources of biomass available to convert into a fuel. And so there are technologies, the gasification process, pyrolysis technology, that folks at UCR are very much interested in and see a very big future in. That would be the feedstock. That would be one of the feedstocks, is to take those trees, put them into this system, and actually produce a renewable fuel from them. Yes. Does that answer your question?
I don't know whether you did or not. What I'm saying is, if you're looking to get the most out of your environmental or emission reductions dollar, I would think that you'd go to the major contributors of emissions and see if you could make a dent in those. And obviously this year, forest fires, have by far have been a major contributor to emissions, even including criteria pollutants. When you consider all the structures that were burned, the paints, the varnishes, oils, and what have you in there. So I mean, it's not just greenhouse gas emissions, but it's a variety of pollutants.
Right. Yep. There's a large feedstock of fuel. I guess if we're talking about fires, that's a huge fuel source that could be used in a much more productive, constructive way as a fuel for renewable natural gas, in a sense. Yeah.
And Bill, this is Naveen Berry. I just wanted to add that, your suggestion is sound, and through our planning strategies, working with Dr. Fine and his group, we'll certainly be looking at that aspect as well. But what Phil is trying to indicate here is that this anaerobic digestion and pyrolyzer pathways that are available for renewable natural gas will help assist dealing with some of that fuel that's available for these forest fires.
No, I'm not arguing. I know you're working within your mission and everything like this, and it's probably over everybody's pay grade here to make that kind of decision. And it's something that would have to come from the top down, from Sacramento down. But it just seems to me that it would be a worthy a worthy effort to, to put a hypothesis together on what would it take to improve that and to reduce the risk of emissions, from these uncontrolled events.
Bill, I have heard anecdotally from a couple different sources that conversation is finally happening at the higher levels in Sacramento, and they're finally waking up to the fact that just putting out every forest fire every time one starts and not managing the forest is not good. Took us 50 years to figure that out. But anyhow, we're getting a lot of topics, so why don't you go ahead and continue the presentation and we can go on.
Okay,
Thank you.
we're on slide 10 right now. It's renewable diesel and biodiesel. Oh, I'm sorry, another
Guys,
question.
let's try and get through the presentation if we can, and then we'll have the questions at the end. Because I think a couple of questions that come up too, I've noticed, are in the presentation, just a couple slides down. So let's go ahead and get through real quick. Thank you.
Okay. So wanted to make a distinction between renewable diesel and biodiesel. Sometimes folks interchange these terms, but wanted to make clear that they are distinctly different. Renewable diesel has the identical chemical composition of fossil diesel without the impurities such as sulfur and other elements. Renewable diesel is fully interchangeable with fossil diesel fuel, is subjected to the same test methods as diesel, and CARB is, through their testing, has demonstrated that the use of renewable diesel can actually translate into about 3 to 18% NOx reduction as a vehicle fuel. Biodiesel, on the other hand, is not fully interchangeable with diesel. It is made from the same feedstocks as renewable diesel, but it goes through a different production pathway. Biodiesel is, again, it's not a drop-in fuel that you could just supplant diesel fuel with. It has to be blended with diesel fuel, typically at a 20% ratio. You might see biodiesel known as B20. It's a 20% mixture with conventional diesel. And this is something that actually the engine OEMs require. They will not cover warranties with regards to engines using full biodiesel. So that's important to know. And also, biodiesel at certain blend levels can actually, we've found that it can actually increase NOx emissions in diesel exhaust. So there's a big difference, and we would obviously encourage the use of renewable diesel. Moving on to slide 11. Going into now some of the projects that the South Coast is co-sponsoring on renewable fuels. So we have a couple of projects, some demonstration and production processes for renewable natural gas with CR&R out in Paris, California. They have an anaerobic digestion process for taking high solid food and green waste and converting that into renewable natural gas. Another project that we're working on in a demonstration effort is with Core Infrastructure and working with the gas company as well. And again, this is the pyrolysis technology that I was referring to. Then we are also working in a retail capacity with a company, a retail station out in Ontario known as Ontario C&G. This entity is where we are co-locating renewable natural gas, hydrogen, electric charging with retail fuel. And then we have some other research projects like I mentioned with UCR and a couple of white papers that we've worked with GNA. Actually, I'll go into detail on these. So this is some photos of the CR&R anaerobic digestion biomethane facility out in Paris, California. It's pretty much state of the art. It's if you have not been there, it is possibly worth a visit. The picture on the far right, that red pipe, is the pipeline interconnect between the Paris facility and the SoCalGas pipeline. So the renewable natural gas that is coming from this facility is actually going into the gas grid. Here is what is CR&R's zero waste cycle. I kind of like to show this slide because it actually gives you an idea of the whole full cycle of what's going on. So you have your food and green waste that is put to the curbside outside your home. you have a vehicle that comes by up in the top there, it picks it up. That vehicle is actually powered by renewable natural gas. So it collects, in essence, the feedstock by which that vehicle is actually powered. It takes that feedstock, it puts it into the anaerobic digestion process. It is cleaned and used again as renewable natural gas. In addition, the part that's not really talked about a lot, but is actually quite a valued market commodity, is the fertilizer that actually results from the remaining solids. Those solids actually are then used as great soil amendment to grow plants. Plants not only for green products, but also for food. So there's a full cycle that's going on here with regards to how your food and your plants and green wastes are actually able to be recycled and converted into productive use. These are some of the specs on the CR&R project. It is a 4-phase project. 2 of those phases have been completed, but the specs there are on each of the phases. So it is to process 80,000 tons per year of feedstock to produce 900,000 gallons a year of renewable fuel that can fuel 75 of CR&R's refuse vehicles per phase. As I mentioned, the interconnect has been completed. CR&R is still, CR&R is going to have 100% of their fleet powered by CNG by 2020, and we believe a significant amount of those are going to be powered with near zero emission engines. And they are also working to get their own fuel pathway and their own carbon intensity number registered with CARB. The figure I put there is based on a comparable type of a project, but their own carbon intensity is still pending. So moving on to slide 15, and we're talking about CORE now. CORE, again, uses a thermochemical process known as gasification and pyrolysis. Basically, what that involves is heating the low moisture biosolids in a very low oxygen environment that converts the solids into gas compounds such as CO2, CO, hydrogen, and methane. This gas is commonly known as syngas. And syngas basically is the building blocks to create other larger hydrocarbon fuels, including liquids. This project is focusing on RNG and renewable hydrogen fuels. So we'll be working with CORE to demonstrate various carbonaceous feedstocks. One of those actually being, we hope, wood and trees that we were discussing earlier. Ontario CNG, the retail operation, as you can see on the left, this again is a conventional fueling station that sells gasoline and diesel, but it also is selling renewable natural gas, on-site produced hydrogen. It's not delivered. It is actually being made at the station through water electrolysis with funding from the CEC. When did they go online?
They went online earlier this year, but their compressor has faulted, so I think they'll be coming back online in October sometimes.
And they are also marketing renewable diesel under the name Propel. They do have ethanol E85, and they also have electric vehicle charging. The canopies that are above those islands, solar panels will be placed on those to help to offset electricity costs. So, some of the elements pertaining to Ontario CNG. I think what's important is to go down to look at, so they've secured a contract for approximately 1 million diesel gallon equivalents per year of renewable natural gas. And as we were talking about some of the drivers for renewable fuels being the LCFS credits, I haven't mentioned the RIN credits. Those have significant value as well. But doing a calculation of the credit value associated with these 1 million diesel gallon equivalents, at the carbon intensity that they are getting in there at negative 254, is actually producing a per diesel gallon equivalent value of about $8. So the credits, based on the average value of credits in the market today, are producing about an equivalent of $8 per diesel gallon equivalent. That's not all going to Ontario CNG, so don't think that that's all. This is the credit value that basically is in the system that will basically feed back to the renewable natural gas producer, which again is a large dairy operation out in Indiana. But it gives you an idea as to how this LCFS market and the RIN market can play a significant part in advancing renewable fuels. What's important to point out in the process is that it's not just the production of the renewable natural gas that's important. You actually have to find a user of this fuel in order to make this system in order for the system to have validity and value. And just as a reference, I mean, I just talked to the owner today. The price is actually $2.09 a gallon. That's what they're selling the renewable natural gas at their site. And he's very, very happy with the fact that we helped to steer him in the direction of renewable natural gas. He was a little apprehensive about what all this renewable natural gas was about, but I think he's pretty happy with the outcome of it. He's engaged with a really good consultant on the LCFS program, and so it's helping his business out a lot. Okay, moving into the UC Riverside research and demonstration efforts. We are co-sponsoring a research and demonstration with UCR that recently opened an RNG research center at their School of Engineering. UCR is looking into renewable natural gas production, the viability of feedstocks here in California, various technologies to convert the biomass into renewable natural gas. So their studies indicate that California could produce almost 300 billion cubic feet, which according to my calculations is about 2.5 billion gallons of renewable fuel per year. Just from organic waste. So instead of landfilling and burning that waste, California could use it to generate enough renewable electricity. Well, just on the renewable electricity component, they say that they could produce enough renewable electricity to power 2 to 3 million homes, or enough fuel to replace 75% of all the diesel fuel used by motor vehicles in California. So UCR will evaluate RNG production potentials via thermochemical conversion and power-to-gas technologies. And I haven't mentioned power-to-gas technologies, but that is where excess renewable electricity is used to produce renewable natural gas and renewable hydrogen. I don't know if you've been following the renewable energy production here in California. But the extensive solar and wind renewable energy is actually generating more electricity than can actually be used at the time. So folks in academia have recognized this as a great opportunity to take advantage of this renewable electricity and convert that into another form of energy that can, that we can make use of, so that we're not just not making use of it. So in conclusion on the UC Riverside part of it, they see a lot of promise in thermochemical renewable natural gas production processes like gasification that can utilize much of the biomass in California, and see that they're recognizing gasification as a great way to convert much of this material into usable products, and such as renewable natural gas and the solids fertilizer, the soil amendment. Finally, the last slide. White papers. South Coast has co-sponsored 2 white papers. I won't go into the details of them, Hopefully, I've covered some of the gist of what's in each of these in my presentation, but I would definitely encourage you to write those websites down. These are free. The first one, Game Changer, next generation heavy-duty natural gas engines fueled by renewable natural gas. It's a very comprehensive look at the nexus between these next generation near zero heavy-duty natural gas engines that can be fueled by very, very low carbon intensity renewable natural gas. And the other paper that we looked into as well is having to do with renewable diesel and how it can play a major part in transportation fuel in California and the opportunities, benefits, and challenges associated with renewable diesel. Again, it is a fuel that is can have a very low carbon intensity and can play a significant role so long as we can get the OEMs to produce that ultra low NOx engine that we vitally need here in the South Coast. So with that, I am take some questions.
Before you go, Rita had her card up during the presentation. You sure? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Phil and Naveen, first of all, I'm extremely impressed at this because for many, many years, especially with the old gas engines and diesel, but the old ones, not the modern ones, the old ones. So this is definitely a step up. I have two questions for you. One, on the HVO and the WVO, okay? Now, enlighten me here. If it gets manufactured and can be used for commercial purposes, because it seems to me that it's still in its infancy stages right now, okay? But let's say it goes on the shelf next to Pennzoil or one of the other big oil brands, Standard Oil, and it's sold. Will this eventually make its way into the car business, into car engines? That's the first question, in your opinion, obviously. And the second question I have is on same thing with the, I wasn't quite sure what you said, renewable natural gas. So that would be natural gas that's in the cylinders. So I'm not clear on your terminology. Okay, that's all.
Okay, I think I need a little bit of further clarification on your first question of HVL, WVL. I'm not sure.
What page you on?
Oh, yeah, let's go.
On your page, let's see, your renewable diesel and biodiesel.
On renewable diesel and biodiesel?
Right.
Okay.
Were you using all the byproducts of say the agricultural business to manufacture N-methanol?
Which page number are you
Oil.
on, Paul?
That would have been
Upper right. It has the green page number in each slide.
9 and 10.
9. There we go.
9 and 10?
There
Renewable
you
diesel. Okay.
So I believe in that completely.
Oh, okay. Waste vegetable oil,
Correct.
feedstocks, vegetable oils as fats, soybean, algae.
Those are just the varied feedstocks that are used to make biodiesel.
Okay.
So they can use a variety of those. Some of those products have made it into kind of an ad hoc approach of vehicle, old diesel engines that can run on any one of these. What we've found in some of our preliminary assessments is actually it increases NOx a little bit.
Right.
So we don't necessarily, the South Coast, get involved with providing any funds towards those efforts because it actually makes our NOx situation a little bit worse. So.
Would that be because, let's say, an existing diesel and it was made well, you can get 1,000,000 miles off those things or more if it's taken care of? Is that because they're just not falling apart and the new ones aren't being introduced in the system? And if it's introduced, the old technology puts it in the air instead of burning it clean?
So I'm sure some of the older diesel engine design technology is such where it really doesn't take advantage of the combustion characteristics that the different biodiesel fuels could have. So that may be causing an increase in NOx. typically speaking, NOx will go up in combustion when it operates at a higher temperature. So I would suspect that that's what may be going on in some of these.
And your second question with regards to renewable natural gas,
It was just, and explain it to me, because maybe I didn't get it. The terminology would be renewable natural gas. Is that the tank that's physically stored in the tanks? Say the gas company puts it up on, and puts renewable natural gas in that tank for use of consumption? Is that what you're referring to?
well, when I'm referring to renewable natural gas, it's strictly that the natural gas is manufactured from renewable sources.
Okay.
So,
Like my lawn. So I live in the CR&R zone. They pick up my trash, and that's their trucks, and that's what they're doing. They're taking all of our green waste from our communities in Southwest Riverside County, putting it through that process. That's the renewable sources, all that green waste and food waste from
Got it.
our yards.
I just wasn't clear on the terminology.
Rita?
Yeah, mine was more of a comment, and it's following up on what Bill mentioned. It's more of a big picture comment, because we see in this presentation and basically in a lot of district presentations that the focus is on mobile sources, on fuels, and that is making up the bulk of the emissions. I read a report from the district that said even if 100% of the stationary sources were to close down, that still wouldn't get us to attainment. So, and the focus is on NOx emission reductions rather than on VOCs. But as a representative of stationary sources, we don't see that the VOCs are less important to the district when they're engaged in policy making. So there seems to be a disconnect and a concern for us because as Bill has mentioned in the past, and David Rothbart has brought it up as well, our concern is if you can't get those emission reductions, then are you going to look to stationary sources? And at what cost? And for what bang for the buck? We specifically, our industry, the UV and EB industry, we've seen, a lot of record keeping, and we're VOC, we're on the VOC side, but we actually reduce VOC emissions. But we still don't see a relief. It's almost like the VOCs are as equally important as the NOx reductions when it comes down to the policymaking aspect of passing a rule requiring, X amount of records, requiring a lot of scrutiny on test methods, for example, which has been an ongoing issue for us. So I think there has to be some thought as to where we're getting the bang for the buck for the emission reductions, and not just to go on, business as usual, passing rules when those actions, they're going to be a lot of times negative to business, and they do not provide an incentive for businesses to stay here in Southern California, and they don't give the district the bang for the buck. And I know Bill brought up a question today during the administrative committee meeting about the cost of some of these programs and the emission reductions that are associated with them. And I think we should definitely keep that in mind from a policymaking perspective. Thank you.
That was more of a statement, right? Got it. Okay. Any other questions on this, guys and gals? All right, very good. Thank you for the update. And for the record, I was at a dinner last night with CR&R and all of their owners and operators. I was at the League of Cities conference down in Long Beach, and so it was a very nice dinner. So, but it's amazing what they're doing at that company, and with the progress they've made, and the 2 more units that when they come online that they're looking to. So basically, they're only half built out right now, but even with that, they have excess gas they're putting back into the system now. So it's a great setup, and can only lead to more. All right, with that, we'll go on to the next item, the update on our South Coast AQMD's incentive programs. Vicki White.
Hi, good afternoon.
Nope, turn it on there. There you go.
Thank you. I'm Vicki White. I work as the Technology Implementation Manager in our Technology Advancement Office. And what I work on are the incentive funding programs. And these are programs that provide funding to equipment owners, primarily mobile source equipment owners, to upgrade their equipment to cleaner equipment. The technologies that we fund, generally speaking, have to be commercially available and or certified by the California Air Resources Board for use in California. With that, I just wanted to give you an overall perspective of what these programs generally are intended for. I'm going to start kind of with an overall summary of what I call our main incentive programs. Carl Moyer, we're actually celebrating the 20th anniversary this year. It's a long-standing program, been very successful. It funds quite a diverse group of projects, very diverse sources. It includes both on-road sources as well as off-road. These are sources that are primarily in the medium heavy-duty and heavy-duty sectors. To date, we've spent about $487 million, and I just noticed this doesn't include my updated slides, but I can go ahead. I have since then added the emission reductions to these slides. I'd be happy to share that with you later. Moyer, for example, has generated about 7,598 tons per year of NOx emissions, as well as PM emissions. And overall, I'll get to that in a minute on aggregate, roughly what these programs have provided over the years. But I'm going to jump over to our Prop 1B program. Prop 1B program is also called the Goods Movement Emission Reduction Program. That program targets vehicles and equipment that are used to transport freight. And these are primarily diesel equipment that they're looking to replace with cleaner equipment. And at the end of this presentation, I'll have an update on that program, but essentially all the funds under this program have been committed through contracts. And we're just following up with those contracts right now for full implementation. Yes? Okay, I'm sorry it's not presented here. Okay, great. Thank you. That really helps. We have another program. It was initiated. This is strictly, it's called the Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program. We've branded this program in our South Coast Air Basin called Replace Your Ride. I hope you've heard of it. It targets the scrap and replace of light-duty vehicles. And we have another option. If someone's willing to replace an older vehicle with, instead of buying a new cleaner vehicle, they can actually get a card, what we call an alternative mobility card, that allows them to use, the transit system or Uber Lyft, for example. And this program also provides funding for electric vehicle chargers. This program started in 2015 as a pilot program. It's come a long way in a short time. To date, we've spent about $24 million, and we've issued vouchers for over 3,000 vehicles. And this program, just one more thing I should mention, it targets participants that are meeting certain low and moderate income levels. So that's kind of what that program is structured for. And another relatively long-standing program, the Lower Emission School Bus Program. This program has been in place since 2001, and it targets the replacement of older diesel buses with cleaner alternative fuel and electric buses. And we also provide funding for infrastructure to support these cleaner buses. And we will also provide funding if there is a natural gas bus out there and the tank is between 14 to 16 years old. It's due for replacement. We'll provide funding to replace the onboard natural gas tank on that bus. I just wanted to mention, in aggregate, when we look at the NOx emission reductions these programs have provided, it's about 41 tons per day. Pretty significant when you look at the impact these programs have overall. So I wanted to quickly go over some of what I call the newer funding, the grants that we received that we're going to be working on. These are actually new funds that are available in fiscal year 17-18 timeframe, and we're still working on implementation. The first one up is the AB 134 program. This program's come to be called the Community Air Protection Program. It is related to the AB 617 program. What the legislators did was they set aside some money through AB 134 for what we call early actions. And they chose to spend that money on existing incentive programs that have been very successful. So that would be namely the Carl Moyer program and the Prop 1B program. And these funds, out of these funds, South Coast was allocated about $107.5 million. And I'll give an update on where we're at in terms of expenditures of those monies. We received a CEC grant during this time, and that's pretty neat grant. It's a grant that's going to be co-funded with Port of LA and Port of LA funds, as well as AQMD's match contribution. So the whole program will be a total of $14 million. And this is to accelerate the deployment of these near zero emission natural gas trucks. These are trucks that are certified to the optional low NOx standard of 0.02 gram per brake horsepower hour. That's 90% cleaner than the current standards. And we're going to prioritize trucks under this program that are servicing the ports. Yes, sir.
Just a question. Are these funds part of the $1 billion a year for 15 years that you're looking for, that you have? I mean, does this represent?
Yes, I mean, they don't add up to 1 billion.
No,
but
I know
these are
that,
counted
but they
towards
apply
that.
towards that.
They sure do, yeah.
Okay, and this is money that you actually have.
Yes, these are
that's a good
monies that
thing.
we have been successful
Yeah,
in
yeah,
getting.
that's a good thing. Thank you.
Yeah, these have been awarded in this fiscal year. And I mentioned the Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program. That's a Replace Your Ride program. I just wanted to mention we were awarded in this fiscal year an additional $16.4 million to continue that program. The Voluntary NOx Remediation Program, this came to us, what happened was through the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, that program incentivized the use of biodiesel. And due to the increased use of that fuel, there was a study that showed there was a consequence, a NOx emissions increase. So what ARB did was they set aside money to mitigate those NOx emissions that were increased as a result of biodiesel use in California. So this year we have received $2.67 million specifically to mitigate that increase that occurred over the past several years. And we were successful in getting a couple EPA grants that are worth mentioning. This one is a grant through the Targeted Airshed program. And we're going to use this grant for incentivizing the purchase of zero-emission lawn and garden equipment. These are electric lawn and garden equipment for commercial use. And with the requirement that those equipment must be purchased and used in environmental justice areas for these monies. And that's about $2.47 million. We received another EPA grant. This one was under the Diesel Emission Reduction Program. And this grant, we're going to look to replace older diesel trucks with, again, the very cleanest available optional low NOx natural gas trucks that are currently commercially available. And our lower emission school bus program, I just wanted to mention that during this fiscal year, we awarded $35.6 million in funding towards cleaner school buses. And these buses that we're going to be funding are all going to be at the very low emission, the cleanest buses available, depending on whether they're using propane or natural gas. Yes, sir.
Vicki, I'm looking at your page here. It's cargo handling, or it says construction AG. I see that because this morning I got cornered by two big cranes over in Glendora because they're doing a big work over there. They're mobiles and they were spewing out diesel fuel. So does this program take care of heavy equipment or just buses and the smaller pieces?
Yeah, not the school bus program, of course, but yeah, we have programs that Moyer program will offer grants for those types of equipment, for example. Is that
Okay.
your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, and following the same rationale. Now, it wouldn't be obviously for the purchase of a new one because they're very expensive, but it would be just to, let's say, gut the engine and put in a cleaner
Yes.
engine.
Yeah.
More or less that basically
Yeah,
it.
it's what we call an engine repower is an option for funding under the Moyer program. Sure.
Thank
And
you.
I think, we can even fund it under this next program I'm going to mention. This is a new program ARB started this year. They call it Funding Agricultural Replacement Measures for Emission Reductions. I think they picked those words because it refers to, the acronym is farmer, and it's really funds that are set aside for farmers that, have these diesel equipment that need replacement. This one, actually, I take that back, specific to replacement option, but it also, the Moyer program would be the program for an engine repower scenario. And overall, all of these new funding, just in this fiscal year, add up to about 102 million. So we're not quite close to 1 billion, but we're getting there. Okay, so here's an update on the Community Air Protection Program funds that we receive for financial incentives. AB 134 signed by the governor in September of last year. It set aside $250 million from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund specifically for Carl Moyer and Prop 1B type projects. So this is the $107.5 million I referred to in my previous slides that have been allocated to South Coast AQMD. And I'll be giving an update on where we're at with those funds. And the requirement of these funds is that, it really has a heavy focus on funding projects that are in disadvantaged and low-income communities. So, and this AB 134 targets these early actions. So they really want to get projects funded quickly through existing incentive programs. So back in November of last year, our board approved $51.7 million in Carl Moyer projects for this program. 88% of these are located in disadvantaged and low-income communities. And then following that, we held a series of public workshops in February, April, beginning of this year, and that community input was used to target our outreach efforts and identify projects for this year's Carl Moyer program, what we refer to as year 20 of our Carl Moyer program. This legislation allows up to 40% of our total allocation to be spent on clean truck projects meeting the Prop 1B criteria. So we have a recommendation that we're bringing to our board in October that will involve about $19 million in clean truck projects to be spent using the AB 134 Community Air Protection Funds. And then the remaining balance of funds we're looking to apply to this year's Carl Moyer program. And we plan to bring the recommended awards to our board in November for the remaining allocation of our AB 134 funding.
Vicki, can I just add something to that?
Sure.
So originally, AB 134 allocated $250 million statewide, of which our district got $107.5 million. And that was a year 17. For year 18, 19, they allocated $245 million. And we're still trying to figure out how much we're going to get, but we should get fairly the same amount. They took off $5 million and reallocated it to go to environmental justice, environmental groups for education and outreach.
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear. This is, AB 134 is our first installment of the Community Air Protection Funds that are going towards incentives, and we're excited to get that second installment. We're beginning conversations with CARB right now on the types of projects we can fund with the second installment of those Community Air Protection Funds. I'm not sure if you guys all heard, but you may have heard of this program, the Volkswagen Settlement. I mention it because it's a pretty significant program that's going to be rolled out starting in 2019. as part of the Volkswagen settlement, there was a environmental mitigation trust that was set up. And for California, there's an appendix in the consent decree. If you want to go to it, we call it Appendix D, or it's called Appendix D. And that's the part of the consent decree that sets aside $423 million for California. This is the mitigation part of the settlement. These funds must be used to mitigate the NOx increase caused by those VW vehicles. And the trust has named CARB as the lead agency for these funds. And back in April of this year, the CARB board approved a beneficiary mitigation plan. They have that on their website. And what this plan does, it identifies 5 eligible mitigation actions. These are also what we call project funding categories. And this slide is basically a chart that was in we call it a BMP, that was in the BMP, right out of the BMP. And this shows kind of the breakdown of this funding per category. And these projects are going to be mostly scrap and replace projects for the heavy duty sector. And the commitment in this plan is that this funding must be used to achieve 10,000 tons of NOx reductions over a 10-year period. And the funds will start becoming available in probably first quarter of 2019. Yes, sir.
Could the purpose of the mitigating trust was, were there more Volkswagens sold around this area than anywhere else? Is that the reason why?
It turns out the hotspots for these vehicles are kind of the metropolitan areas. South Coast did have probably the biggest percentage of vehicles that violated.
Now, is this spread out throughout the country or just here?
Oh, it was spread out throughout the country. Yeah, it's
Thank you.
actually a $3 billion settlement nationwide, and different states, some states have already started rolling out the settlement monies. Yeah.
And then, isn't it true, Vicki, that VW was able to use some of their money to put in infrastructure, charging
Yes.
stations stuff? So not the
Yeah.
entire $3 billion was actually given out. Portion of it was given to, while they were able to basically make themselves look good and put charging stations out there.
Yeah, Derek's absolutely correct. There's a Electrify America portion of this whole settlement that VW is rolling out the charging infrastructure for their future electric vehicles.
I have a question. What happened, or what is happening to all those non-compliant little Herbies around the country?
VW is doing a recall.
Are they being crushed or what?
No, they're actually recalling those and fixing it. So all of those vehicles received a recall to bring the vehicle in so they can fix it. And they're not allowed to be operated in California unless they're fixed through the recall process.
We're not sure how they're going to deal with those. Certainly their initial performance is probably going to be affected, I would guess.
Yeah, so this portion that I'm talking about is strictly the Electrify America side of it. That's the 800 million you may have heard of, and that's the part Naveen mentioned and Derek touched on. But this part is strictly the mitigation funds that we need to use to generate what they call surplus emission reductions to mitigate that impact. So we have a goal through this BMP to achieve 10,000 tons of NOx reductions over the 10-year period. This slide shows the 5 project funding categories. They're listed here, and also the funding allocations that CARB has committed to in their beneficiary mitigation plan. And I just kind of highlighted the technologies that are allowed to be funded through these different categories. And CARB has taken an extra step to identify the air districts that will be administering those funds. So you can see there's 3 air districts that will be responsible for administering these funds statewide. it's a very unique way of administering these funds, but we're working through the implementation process right now. South Coast AQMD has been identified to administer 2 funding categories statewide. And these funds are actually going to be implemented or dispersed to the air districts in installments. We're not going to get for example, the $60 million bin for combustion, freight, and marine projects. That's not all coming in 2019. We're actually going to get it in 2 installments. So we'll get the first 30 million to be allocated probably roughly over a 2-year period. ARB requires that we issue 2 solicitations under that category that are at least 2 years apart. So it will be rolled out probably between year 1 and year 5. All the funds will be committed through contracts, but it's going to be rolled out slowly over those 5 years.
Vicky, if I may add.
Sure.
In this chart, the combustion, freight, and marine projects category is the one that's assigned to South Coast. And out of that 60 million, they're estimating about 2/3 of their overall NOx emission reduction goals, or out of the 10,000 tons. That category is estimated to have about 2/3 or 6,700 and some odd tons reduced. So as you can see, and I think Phil early on in his presentation touched on, the most cost-effective pathway continues to be in the near term, natural gas and or repowering with cleaner diesel engines.
Hey, Naveen, where it says concrete mixers here on your mitigation project, are those big, gigantic concrete mixers that are off to the side to crush rocks when they're building freeways? Because it's not the mobile ones, is it?
They're mobile. Sorry. They are the cement trucks. Yeah, they're the mobile trucks.
Yes, on this slide, you have the CARB reserve listed at 63 million. What is that reserve being used for?
That's a great question. So CARB is reserving funds for a couple of reasons. One is they need to monitor the progress of this program over time. And if it looks like any of these project categories are not achieving the emission reductions that they need, they want to reserve funds so that they can use those funds to fund other projects to meet their 10,000 ton NOx commitment. So they kept those funds back, and part of those funds include their administrative costs as well.
Do you know what the administrative cost is? Do you have a breakdown?
We do. For each of these funding allocations, they gave the districts 10% admin funds, and then ARB's reserving like 15% for themselves. So out of that 63 million, 10% relative to those funding categories, the districts get to administer the program, and then ARB's keeping another 15% for themselves. And that includes, there's a lot of reporting requirements, both the air districts will have to do, as well as ARB to the trust and because it's a legal document, a lot of reporting. So I do feel that the admin costs they've given us to administer and implement these bins may not be sufficient. So we're coordinating with, trying to discuss with ARB right now if there's any way we can get a little more support. So we have to develop a website. We have to have a database that tracks all these projects. We have all the reporting. I think we're going to have quarterly, semi-annual, annual reporting. So that brings, just a recap of what we did in last year's Carl Moyer program. The board approved 79 million in projects. So this includes both the traditional Moyer funds as well as the AB 134 funds. I think the reason I want to show this is this year when we closed our solicitation, we got basically more than 3 times the funding requests we got last year. So it's great, but it requires a lot more work to evaluate those projects, and we need more funds. We just don't have enough funds to fund all the projects that come in. This is a breakdown of our contract awards per category. This year, looking at all of our funding sources that can be applied to our Moyer program, we're looking about having funds available totaling approximately 61 million. And we closed in June of this year. And like I said, we received funding requests up to 361 million. So we clearly do not have sufficient funds to fund all the projects that are found eligible that qualify for the funding. So we are always looking for grant opportunities to get more funding. We will be generating a very healthy backup list, and maybe we can negotiate with CARB to use some of these CAP funds to help fund those projects. And my last slide is just a really quick update on the Prop 1B program. Basically, the Prop 1B program was dispersed in 5 funding cycles. And years 1 through 4, we are completely liquidated. So those are projects that are not only under contract, but have been paid and are currently deployed and generating the emission reductions. And this program, you know, funded the heavy duty trucks. We funded 25 shore power systems at ports. These are systems that, you know, the ships, when they come to berth, they can plug in and turn off their diesel engines. Huge reductions from those projects. And locomotive projects, you know, replacing older locomotives with cleaner, very clean locomotives. The Tier 4 final standards became available recently, so we're really trying to incentivize those projects. Year 5, we've committed all the funds now under 1B program, and year 5 has all been committed through contracts. We're just now monitoring those projects to, you know, work with them to on their timeline for placing orders for the equipment, getting the invoices in, and then we'll be doing reporting on their actual performance under the contract. And that's it. I hope I gave you guys some sufficient information on these programs. Yes, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you. Very good presentation. It focused on mobile sources. Are any of these funds available for stationary sources, or are they basically restricted to mobile sources? And then the second part of that question is, what other funding is available out there for stationary sources?
It's a good question, and I know Derek was working on that legislation. That our second installment of CAP funds, I think it's SB 856 or 865. That will be our second installment. About 245 million has been set aside for incentives. And this time around, they're not just focused on incentivizing projects in the more, you know, Carl Moyer Prop 1B type projects. They actually have also included stationary source incentives. And we're in the process of trying to understand what that looks like, developing guidelines for that, et cetera. Sure.
If I may add, most of these funds, these incentive funds, are specifically designated for mobile sources. But you may recall earlier this year, our Planning and Rules Division actually put out a RFP to also fund some stationary projects. And I know a lot of people have submitted to it, then they're going through some review and finalization process. But as opportunities come about, the district does, when they're able to identify funds, ask for those stationary type projects as well.
Yes, sir.
I was curious on the TRUs, what actual type of technology are you using to improve their efficiency?
They're basically, on the TRUs, these are those tractors with refrigerated containers on them. They utilize a diesel auxiliary power unit, so we're replacing that with an electric motor. It's actually removing the old refrigerated container, replacing it with one that has an electric motor to provide the cooling for the. They do have to plug it in, and we're providing funding for the chargers as well. Yes, sir.
I guess to maybe follow up on Rita's last comment, as I said, I was glad to see that there is some funding available in your presentation, even though it's for mobile sources. But as you go through CARB's blueprint, sprinkled throughout this entire document is the word incentives. And they talk about stationary sources. And it seems like the best that we can get from staff here, is staff is committed to seek incentive funding. And I think as we get closer to July 23rd or 4th, whenever these communities are going to be approved, incentive funding is going to be needed, certainly within a year after the monitoring. So, all of us, certainly industry representatives, are waiting to hear that change from staff is committed to seek funding, that staff has secured funding for stationary sources. That is really a big issue for businesses large and small, but especially small businesses. Money in the bank, and is it available for incentives?
We'll certainly take that message back. Again, one of the things I did want to clarify here, these funds are typically for projects or reductions that are above and beyond any SIP commitments. And that's the way ARB structured them. And I think that's the same issue that we run into in South Coast as well, that if we're going above and beyond existing regulations, those incentive funds can be available. But the legislator has clearly provided a very strong path forward for the mobile source reductions, and between the Technology Advancement Office, our Executive Office, and especially our Public Affairs and Legislative and Public Affairs Office, we've managed to actually get a lot of incentives this past year and in the next few years than we had previously, even for mobile sources. But your point is well taken, and again, the limitation continues to be above and beyond SIP requirements.
Yeah, and I know you're struggling to get that billion a year, but it's as you go through this, as a reader goes through this, maybe that billion a year is not going to be enough. Maybe it's going to be significantly more than $1 billion a year, and especially when you're talking about stationary sources, you're going to have to, at some point in time, relatively soon, when you get these community steering committees looking at technologies for emission reductions, it has to parallel with incentive funding being available to do that.
So, Bill, if I could just add to the comments, is that, when we're in Sacramento and we hear from leadership, whether it be on the Senate side or the Assembly side, and they're, wanting us to implement 617, making sure it's successful. The first year was mobile, but the next year's year 2, which we're into now, and year 3, you're going to see kind of a shift from strictly mobile and looking at also stationary. And we recognize that, when we're in these communities, we're doing the monitoring, and we realize, or we find out what the issues are, we have to come up with a mitigation plan. And part of the mitigation plan is going to be, okay, how are we going to correct it, and what are you going to do to correct it? Because it's all fine and dandy, you have it written down, this is the problem, but how do you address it, truly address it? And we know that there's going to be small businesses out there that are not going to be able to afford those type of equipment that's going to be needed to clean it up. And so I hear what you're saying. I think you see a lot more latitude now when it comes to the funding for the implementation or incentivizing of 617.
Well, it's good to hear that we're all on the same page on that. We've seen the very beginning of this in Rule 1469, where you have people come here that are legitimately concerned about the viability of their businesses and their employees, about are they going to have jobs, and the lower these thresholds go, the more costly it is, for businesses to afford this. For small businesses, we're talking about basic affordability. as the agencies reduce these thresholds.
So I'm not going to say it's not going to go to mobile sources, but you're going to see more money going towards stationary. I just want to make that clear that it's, it's a
Yeah, and just one comment, speaking of 1469, and Naveen, you were mentioning, that it has to be for the incentives. In order for you to be eligible, you have to be doing above and beyond what a regulation or the SIP would call for. Well, that's kind of, the conundrum, because you take an example like 1469, the proposed amendments, which haven't gone into effect yet. But once they go into effect, then essentially that business loses the opportunity to seek the incentive funding, because now it's mandated by a rule. So it's what they have to do. They're not going above and beyond. I mean, now, if you did it before the rule adoption, they could claim that they're going above and beyond the rule. But once the rule is in place, then they lose that ability to be eligible for that.
All right. Thank you very much. Great presentation. We'll go on to the written reports. Any questions on the written report that's attached? Anyone? Not seeing any. Any other business? Derek, do you have anything else you want to go back over again?
I already let the cat out of what's the phrase?
Cat out of the bag?
Cat out of the bag, yeah, so no, I have no other things.
Paul.
I've got really 3 requests. The first one, I'd like to get a clear reading, and I've asked you this before, on the sriracha. Did you put a little sign up there?
Wasn't for you, Paul. Go ahead.
Oh, all right. On the sriracha issue, where the city of Irwindale dropped a lawsuit against the facility. Of course, AQMD was mentioned, but I'd asked you this before because the issue was, the reason the lawsuit came because they had 6 complaints. That was the number that was batted around. And I'd like to.
I don't know if that was, that was not the reason for the lawsuit.
Right.
The complaints that were sent to us, that wasn't the reason.
Okay, I understand that totally. But I'd like to see something a little clearer on that as we go down the road, because sooner or later, it doesn't have to be the sriracha plant. It's going to happen somewhere else as far as what would get AQMD involved in that, or the existing regulations. But I'd like to see, not today, obviously, not today, but let's say down the road, as far as why the district got involved. That's the first item, okay? And then the second item was the taxation issue that we discussed prior. I'd like to see that type of actual publication, and I'll try to find it on the website next month. If I can't, then I'll bring it up again.
Say that again, which one was that?
That was the taxation, giving the authority the taxation power.
So our sales tax, the legislation we're going to be seeking for authority for a sales tax? Is that
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
So what exactly did you want?
I'd
from
like
that?
to see the draft of it.
There's no draft.
Okay.
Our board just approved it last week for us to seek legislation.
Okay.
So before we can even seek legislation, we need to find an author.
Okay.
So before we got to go out and do our homework on reaching out to potential authors, and then.
I think Paul was referring to the, when they did the survey.
Oh, the poll.
Sure.
We want the poll.
The polling survey.
Oh, okay, yeah, no problem.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, there we go.
And lastly, before we close out for new business, I invited this young gentleman back here. His name is Mark Eng. He's a president of the Asian Business Association. I'd like to have people meet him, not today, but maybe next year sometime, see if he can get on this board, but that's down the road.
Sure.
Thank you.
Bill, you have something?
And I'm just proposing that this agency give a 100-year waiver to the sriracha plant and everything they produce.
We give advice on how to mitigate their odors, and that's a fight between the city and sriracha, not between us.
Well, with all that advice, you think they could give us a bottle for our lunch here? Okay, put your mic on the ball.
No, we had a Chamber of Commerce meeting there a couple weeks ago, and the lady promised me, I said, look, I got a lot of friends, I'd like to take a couple of boxes, here, take them. So I'll give them away if I can put my hands on them.
You may have to recuse yourself.
Yeah, now you're in trouble now.
And
All
you
right.
gotta report it.
One other item coming up, the Environmental Justice Conference, this will be the 4th annual. It's on Wednesday, September 26th from 8 to 1. That's out in LA, back at the chapel. So that's also out there if anyone wants to go to that. Any other business by any of the board members? Paul, your card's still up? You're good? Okay. Not seeing any public comment on it?
Just a calendar item on September 27th, the ARB board will vote on the year 1 617 communities, and I think 3 out of the 4 communities South Coast nominated are selected, so.
That's on either, 27th or 28th. They meet both days, depending on when they bring it up.
All right. With that, our next meeting will be Friday, October 12th, back here at 11:30. Good day, everybody. Have a good weekend.